Hey, what's up, everybody? We're here with you on a Friday night, but we're not live. That's right. We had to pre-record this one, but we will be in the chat section, so feel free to start chatting. So this week, we've got 9 questions that we have about Yoda in the High Republic, and we take your questions, and it all happens right now.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. 2 fans, 2 generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So what's been going on? We always start out the show by trying to figure out, catching up what's been going on this week.
Oh, man, school's in full swing here in Michigan and probably around the country. So it's been crazy. Virtual learning is not as easy as it seems. I'm sure a lot of parents at home probably share my sentiment. But, yeah, man, just staying busy with that, trying to deal with the kids and provide education.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, most everything is going virtual nowadays. And naturally, in my business, I'm doing the same thing,
Right.
Lots of virtual events happening. So hopefully, you guys are going to start chatting with us pretty soon because we're going to get ready to talk some Star Wars today. We got a really interesting topic. We're actually going to do a little bit of a shorter show this time. So I usually say this all the time. For those of you guys who are clicking on it, this is going to be the topic that we're talking about, but this is the only topic that we're talking about. And then after that, we'll take your questions. So you ready to talk some Star Wars?
Yeah, man, let's go for it.
All right, let's do it. All right, so we have a little bit of a special thing this time because we just got some news about Yoda appearing in the High Republic.
Right, on Cinema Blend.
Yeah, Cinema Blend. So Cinema Blend basically did this whole thing about 9 questions that we have. And I remember you sent that to me.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really cool thing. I'm like, you know what? We should actually take this article and go through it because these are some of the questions that I think a lot of us have when it comes to Yoda and the High Republic, because I think a lot of people assume that Yoda would probably be, at least he should be, but we always thought that, I remember we had a conversation once where it was like, how could they not have Yoda in the High Republic? Because if you're dealing with the Jedi during this era, he's got to be there.
Yeah, I mean, especially when, in the Return of the Jedi, he's like 900.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay.
So now he's going to be like 700.
Yeah, so in this point, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you just kind of have to kind of really think about it like, okay, why wouldn't he be there?
Exactly. But the thing is, they didn't really necessarily want to make it too Yoda-centric. Maybe.
Yeah.
And we were introduced to all those characters,
Back.
6 months ago?
Yep.
It's been a while because actually we were supposed to have the first book by now.
Yeah, so disappointed. We won't get the books until actually January of 2021, which is about 4 months from now. So,
well, speaking of books,
nah, don't even go there.
well, I actually bought the new Thrawn book that came out.
Okay. There's
a new Thrawn book that came out. I don't actually remember the title of it, to be honest with you. I bought it because I knew it was coming out, but then I saw it, and I'm in the middle of reading like another 1 or 2 books that are non-Star Wars related right now, but I'm like, oh man, I gotta get this book because it's like 800 pages or something.
Wow.
And it basically deals with, I think it's like a Thrawn prequel actually.
Okay.
So it deals with him and the Chiss and the whole deal. So it's going to be really interesting. But we were supposed to get the first High Republic book by now, and we haven't gotten it yet. And I think we're getting it like around January, I think.
Yep.
So it was really interesting that, once again, it seems like there's a Star Wars no man's land, dead zone of news, and then all of a sudden they'll come out with something that's just crazy. I remember they had all this Mandalorian news coming out,
right?
And then out of the nowhere, StarWars.com, no less, says, oh, here's this young Yoda picture. We're like, whoa. This is Yoda in the High Republic or whatever. And we're like, I mean, the head's exploding.
Yeah, it kind of looks like he's in his prime.
Yeah.
Or at least, I don't even know if he's in his prime. I think he's still...
Well, you got to think about it this way. If Baby Yoda is like 50 years old and he's like a little toddler, But look at how much power he has.
Well, yeah, what I mean by prime, I'm just talking about like age-wise, because he still has the walking stick. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, was there ever a point where he didn't have it?
Right. Well, there's a lot of questions that we have. And you know what? Cinema Blend had some questions that they posed. And so we thought we would do for this special show, since we couldn't be live this week, we thought, you know what? Why don't we go through the 9 questions that all of us probably have about Yoda's appearance in the High Republic?
All
right. So you're the one with the computers. Like,
well, you have one too.
I do, but it's like
I know, it's for
producing the show.
So here we go. So the first question is, why isn't Yoda already head of the Jedi Council?
Next.
So it says Yoda has been has been a Jedi for centuries. So even during the times of the High Republic, I have to think that he's one of the senior members of the Order, and yet he's apparently not the head of the Jedi Council, and is instead has the role of a teacher. Even if that's his passion at the moment, wouldn't the Jedi be better served by having someone with his level of experience at the helm? I guess not considering how things shake out during the short period Star Wars fans have seen him in control, perhaps he should have stayed a teacher. So my thing is, this is kind of gleaning in some information, because I didn't really get the fact that, I wonder where they're getting the fact that he's not the head, because even when we saw him in, I believe it was Revenge of the Sith, he was teaching younglings still, and he was still the head of the council.
Unless I missed something, Jason can probably shed some light on this, but I think that they're making this assumption because there may have been some information when they were interviewing, when they were introducing all those Jedi that we're going to see, like the main characters. Mm-hmm. It seemed like one of those guys was either the head or prominent. Because I thought the same thing you did. I was like, well, what makes him think he's not the head of the Jedi Council?
Right.
Did I miss something in this article or whatever? I mean, what actually led them to believe that he wasn't the head?
Yeah, I mean, and my thing is, that would be weird to see like a Star Wars, well, I won't say a film, because there's no film based upon this, at least not yet. But even just reading or just having the concept of Yoda not being at the helm.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah,
I think that it's weird, but I want to see that, though.
Yeah, I do. And I wonder, like, okay, well, who was more powerful than him?
And well, that's another thing. Like, exactly.
How did that, did people have to check Yoda about some things? Or?
Well, that's it. I don't necessarily think that anybody was more powerful than him, but he may have, it almost might have been like I hate to compare it like this, but an Anakin situation. Where it's not so much a question of the power, it's a question of maturity, wisdom. Again, things that you would think that Yoda just possessed naturally. I mean, it almost seems like that species just has this natural wisdom to it,
Yeah, and also just the fact that he's lived longer, so he's seen more. So it's like, okay, well, is there another species that lives longer than him that would have more knowledge than he would? So I don't know. I mean, like, I'm really interested to see that dynamic, though, because I think, we've always seen Yoda as his wise master, and, he's always had the answers. But even in the Clone Wars cartoon, you see that he still will go off on missions to gain more knowledge when he wanted to learn how to become a Force ghost. So I could still, once again, like, even and that was taking place during the Clone Wars time. So he's well into being, the head of the Jedi Order. Even Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi, they were trying to prevent him from actually going, because he was like burning himself out trying to meditate and trying to figure this stuff out, and he actually kind of like wore himself out. They had to admit him to the infirmary and all this, and he still kind of like snuck out to go on this mission. So
well, and I think that that's one of the things that you do bring up an interesting point, is that at what point it's almost like a president kind of a thing. You protect them and everything, but if you have somebody that actually wants to go out, it's almost like if Anakin had been in a leadership type position. Mm-hmm. Can you really imagine him not wanting to go out and do the missions?
Mm-hmm. It was, especially because he loved that type of stuff anyway.
Well, it's kind of like, I liken it you're still in education. I was in it for decades. So, I mean, it's almost like when a teacher becomes an administrator.
Right.
Sometimes there's certain people that are just natural teachers that even though they possess the skill and the knowledge and the experience to move into administration, really they're better served being teachers. And I think in the case of the Jedi, it's really interesting when you think about Yoda, because Yoda is immensely powerful. So he's somebody that you do want out there on the missions because he could probably just
get it done,
get it done really, really quick, But at the same time, he's the kind of guy you really need as the head of the Jedi Council. So it's not just who's more powerful than him, who's wiser than him.
Well, I think also, too, if you really think about it, like there's at this point or this juncture in the Star Wars saga, well, not saga, but Star Wars lore, if you will, there aren't any Sith Lords. So, I mean,
That's true. They were extinct for a millennia or something. So,
yeah, they're relatively peaceful times. So it's like you really don't really necessarily need someone probably like Yoda to really sit at the forefront of things. He can actually use his wisdom, and it's better suited, actually, like you said, to teach because he has all this experience dealing with kids. He kind of has that gentle spirit. He understands the minutiae. He has that patience to deal with little kids, and that's hard.
Well, the patience is the big thing. Patience is actually one of the primary things that I think is the hardest thing when you're teaching anybody.
Yeah.
Whether it's kids, whether it's adults, it doesn't matter. It's like when you're trying to teach somebody something, it's like,
yeah.
You got to be patient because especially when you can do something, very easily because you have the experience and the knowledge, and you watch somebody else and they're kind of struggling and you're like, oh, this is so simple. I can't believe this person can't do it. That's the natural thing you have to get over as a teacher. And Yoda seems like he has all that patience that he can, deal with that. He
remembers what it's like to not be able to do it. Or
right.
He has that empathy,
Sure. I mean, even you can make the argument that Luke, by the time of The Last Jedi, is pretty much a grandmaster status. And Yoda's still teaching him.
Yep.
Even a grandmaster. Somebody who's arguably more powerful than even him, he's still there to teach. So that's one of the examples that I would give if people say anything about the power, is that you don't necessarily have to be more powerful to be able to teach somebody.
Yeah, it's the wisdom to wield that power.
Absolutely. It's the wisdom. And I think that you have to wonder if he's not the head of the council, or at least not prominent, then who is?
Exactly.
And I think that would be, but what about you guys? I mean, I'm sure we're probably all chatting in the chat section right now, but who do you guys think that is the head of the Jedi Council? Or is there something that came out that we're missing that we don't know that, everybody's like, idiots. It was, Star Wars show.
Yep.
But what's question number 2?
Question number 2, is Yoda a better or worse Jedi in the past? The assumption is that most Jedi only get better with time, but when you're someone who's lived as long as Yoda, I have to imagine that there's a slow decline. I'd be curious to learn if Yoda's command of the Force was weaker or stronger in the High Republic era. Keep in mind that the child from The Mandalorian was a Force-choking and lifting beast at age 50. So I don't think it's crazy to believe Yoda's powers peaked well before episodes 1 through 3.
Yeah, it would seem that would probably be true, and what I'm using as evidence for that is the fact that Yoda, if you look at the difference between him in 1 through 3 versus him in 4 through 6.
Well, more like 5 through 6.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, I know.
But I mean, you might as well throw 4 in there too, because
he was still around, right?
He was around, and he was pretty much doing the same thing. He was. So I mean, but you're right. We'll take 5 and 6 because that's where we actually see him. There's way difference in his power. Now, granted, you do have to make allowances for the fact that the dark side is stronger at that point too, and that may. I don't know if we ever really discussed that or not, but when the light side was being clouded by the dark, it makes me wonder if the Jedi that were around, because apparently there's a gang of them, We're finding that out now. All these Jedi are popping up, and now we're like, okay, well, the big question we always have is, well, where were they during 4 through 6? It's like, if any more Jedi start to pop up, I'm going to be like, you guys could have just all banded together and overthrown the Emperor at this point, guys. I mean, there's like 12 of you at this point. And that's not including Luke. But what I'm wondering, though, is that were the Jedi actually weaker during this time? Not necessarily because they were less in numbers, but because the dark side was basically clouding the light side, which would weaken them.
You talking about as far as 1 through 3?
No, in 5 through 6. He was starting to do it in 1 through 3, but it didn't really take full effect until afterward.
Well, I mean, when you look at his power...
Well, you're right, though. He was kind of clouding it during 1 through 3, though.
Who, Palpatine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's when
that's how he actually got power. It was actually Yoda that was clouding the dark side by that. So that pretty much nullifies the entire point that I made.
Glad you can...
Wasting the last 2 or 3 minutes of our time.
Well, here's my thoughts, though. I think arguably, like, there's a greater sense of, like, I think his power and ability was probably at its all-time high, probably like around episodes 1 through 3. Just at the simple fact of the feats that he was able to do. And in some ways, because it's like, all right, take for example when he fought Dooku. Okay, so you see him battle Dooku. He was having some issues with some things. Like, okay, he absorbed the Force lightning. Of course, we saw him with the lightsaber duel. That was nothing for him. But when it came to the Force, he was pretty powerful. He's absorbing lightning. He's doing all that type of stuff. But then when Dooku actually was about to drop that huge metal cinder block thing on Obi-Wan, and Yoda had to catch it in midair, Yoda was seeming to kind of struggle with it, and then he was kind of tired afterwards. We get to...
That seems to be the case with that species, as we see with Baby Yoda.
Right.
It tuckers those poor little things out whenever they have to exert. But that's a good point, though, because here he was zipping around, in this lightsaber battle. Okay, no problem. Absorbing Force lightning and everything else. But now when you actually have to physically lift or whatever an object, it's like, that takes some...
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in the comic books, they're pulling planets out of orbit and, bringing Star Destroyers down like it's nothing. But
yeah, and then when you get to Revenge of the Sith, which is a movie later, and there's maybe only a few years in between Attack of the Clones.
Oh, yeah, it was. It was only, I think...
It was about 4 years?
Yeah, or 5 or something.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
In between that time, now when we see him go up against the Emperor, who's a way much powerful opponent, seeing how he's handling things. Now when the Emperor is chucking those pods at him, he doesn't seem to struggle as much. When he's catching that thing, then he's spinning it back, and then he's shooting it back up at him.
So you're saying that he's actually growing in power as time goes on.
As time goes on, because then now when you're seeing, and I'm just judging it based upon his use of the Force, because, okay, so we see that in 3. We don't see Yoda again until 5. In 5, he's just calmly lifting the X-Wing out of water, and he's flying it across a pond, which is heavier than that center block, which is heavier than that pod, and he's doing it almost effortlessly. So I'm thinking that as he gets older, he gets stronger. It's just that
almost
he's
looked
physically...
like he was taking a nap. It's like Luke's probably like, man, maybe I should wake him. He's all like...
Yeah, and then...
almost like he's nodding off while he's doing it,
And so when you look at that, I think Yoda, he's more powerful as he gets older, because once again, he's still growing in knowledge, but I think that just physically, though, he can't do it. So it's almost kind of like a parent, their mind is sharp, but physically they just can't do what they used to do when they were younger.
Oh, that could be. And so any kind of a Force feat maybe they could do. It's just as time goes on.
Yeah, Force things, I think, but I think there's certain elements that he knew it himself that he was breaking down,
Well, but it also makes me wonder too, And I think we do get to this a little bit later with one of the other questions about the cane, because...
Actually, that's the next question.
Is it?
Yep.
Well, let's roll into that one.
All right, so they asked, what's the story about the cane? And, of course, this younger concept of Yoda, he's rocking the cane at 700 years old. That said, I am entertaining the theory that Yoda perhaps had the cane for reasons other than old age, like maybe something related to a battle injury.
Yeah, I was going to say, or maybe he's just handicapped or something. It's like, it sounds funny to say, but he's the only, other than Baby Yoda, he's the only one of that species that there's Yaddle, but at least extensively. Yaddle, we just saw sitting down pretty much at the council. We haven't seen her do anything.
Right.
So he's really the only one of the species that we've seen that we can base anything on, and we don't know. Maybe he's maybe he's like special ed or something.
I think one of those things, it could be a battle injury, which I could understand that.
Yeah,
that would make sense, especially given his time of service and things like that. I can understand if even being of age. I can understand. It's just that the Force, he's not relying on the Force at that time. But of course, when he's fighting Dooku, he's totally immersed in the Force at that point. So it's everything kind of just comes to it. It's almost like an adrenaline rush. You don't even feel it until afterwards, because you notice after he fought Dooku,
right? Yeah.
First thing he did was grab that cane.
And he's all hobbling along. So it makes me wonder, though, if we really don't know the way that species ages.
Yeah, at what point are you considered old,
right,
as a Yoda?
Because if if the Yoda species is like a toddler at 50,
right, which
really was one of the most, if I had to put together a list of the most surprising things about the Mandalorian, that would be one of them.
Yeah.
Is but I think what they're trying to do is maybe take away some of the ancientness. That's probably not even a word, but almost like the antiquity of Yoda. Because if he aged like we age, then 900 would be crazy. It'd be biblical at that point.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're like a toddler at 50, it's almost like
it's relative.
Yeah, exactly. It's relative. They age the way we do. It's longer duration.
Yeah, it's almost like dog years.
Yeah, but the opposite.
The opposite, right?
Right. So, it's almost like every, 50 years of their years is like 2 or 3 of ours or something.
Yeah.
And then you can go, okay, cool, but we really don't know, and that's why it's so hard to figure out if he needs the cane, and is this a battle injury, is this age? We really can't say anything about old age simply because we really don't know the lifespan of this species. And even if you say, okay, 800, 900 years old is basically their life expectancy.
Yeah, that might be 80 years old.
But we don't know. Because if you're going, okay, well, if 50 is like a toddler, what's middle age to them? What's teenage years?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So 98 years old, he might be 15.
Exactly. So by the time he's 700, maybe he's in his 30s.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Another thing too, if you look at the pictures of Yoda, and the ones that they've illustrated, he's standing upright. Whereas most of the time we see him kind of hobbled over. He has that little hump in his back. So, you kind of you can definitely tell there's some wear and tear there. But like you said, you just don't know how certain things, and we don't know what affects age for them. In the sense of, we know that the Force drains them a lot of times, like we saw with Baby Yoda. Does that have an effect on your body? Does that age you faster? The more you exert.
Or the opposite.
Yeah.
Does your age affect, how much you can do? It's almost like a baby doing something is going to wear them out more than an adult,
Exactly.
So it's kind of is it the opposite? There's a lot of variables that we just don't know yet, and that's why it's going to be really interesting to see or to read, because right now they're still talking novels.
Mm-hmm.
But I know they've actually flirted with comic books, and they've been talking about that as an eventual thing, that they're going to do some comics.
I mean, honestly, I think this could go into films, honestly. I mean, I really would think
it should go into films.
Because I think this is a wide open arena where you could really delve into a lot of the culture. And it's like the only person you're really dealing with that you're familiar with is Yoda.
Yeah.
Everybody else is like, okay, brand new. So
yeah.
I think that would be great that people can have that familiarity, but people can see like, oh, wow, this is what a young Yoda was like. But then like now you can see the different concepts as far as how they view the Force. And that's what the next question is that are Yoda's views on the Force the same as we've seen? Yoda was always treated as a sage in regards to the Force and the state of the galaxy. But was he always like that? I'm still hung up on the fact that Yoda was not the highest ranking member of the Jedi Council in the High Republic, and I suspect there has to be some reason beyond not wanting the job. Perhaps his thoughts on the Force aren't in line with the era's authority, or he had his own period of growth in this era that's worth seeing here.
Yeah, a little Qui-Gon.
Yeah.
So apparently Cinema Blend is really under the impression that he is not the head of the Jedi Council.
Yeah.
Somewhere there must be information that we haven't seen, and I thought I was keeping pretty good track of this High Republic stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Apparently I haven't been keeping good track of it because they're firmly under the impression, I should say, that, at some point he's not the head. But in dealing with the question as it is posed, if he is not the head of the council, you would almost have to assume that it's because of some... I don't necessarily think it's a maturity thing. I think it's more of a philosophical thing.
Sure, I could totally see that.
And it could very well be that maybe his whole kind of almost like retreating inward and wanting to learn more about the Force and connect and be deeper and all that might differ from this kind of Knights of the Round Table version of the Jedi we seem to be getting, just based on what little we know and the pictures.
And it could be just a responsibility thing. Like, I know sometimes, and you and I have talked about this before about leadership when we work together. But sometimes you're better off being like, you have more freedom not being in a leadership role because you're not so scrutinized, so to speak. Because when you're in a leadership role, like, you have to set policy and precedent, and you have to deal with all the different issues, where if you're kind of like in the middle, if you're just kind of like one of the people, so to speak, you kind of have that autonomy to kind of do different things, and you can expand yourself more. Whereas a lot of times in leadership, you kind of put in the box where you kind of have to just do that. Mm-hmm. And maybe at this point in time, Yoda's like, I don't want that responsibility. I can understand. It's kind of like no different than being an administrator. Like, yeah, maybe being an administrator may give you more money, more prestige, but it's also more responsibility.
Yeah, my dad was like that, actually. He was offered foreman position a few times, and he was just like, and you would get a bump in pay or whatever, but it was kind of like it wasn't enough to deal with
the crap that you got to deal with.
The crap that you got to deal with, and it was like, he would just rather do the job he was doing rather than be in this supervisory position and all that.
Yeah, and sometimes you do get to a point where, you eventually say like, okay, I know what needs to be done, so I have to take this position, because if I don't do it, who's going to really do it the way it needs to be done?
And that could be why Yoda ends up taking it.
Exactly.
I have to think that, if Yoda's not the head of the Jedi Council, it's got to be by his choice.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine a universe where he's not ready. And honestly, it's almost like a Last Jedi kind of thing. I can't fathom, for instance, Luke being completely disillusioned and all this other stuff, but I'd like to see that. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, I think I would have liked to have seen it a little bit differently than the way that it was presented in The Last Jedi, but the concept was really good.
Yeah.
And made perfect sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and that's the thing, too. And you probably, I would love to see Yoda learn the lessons that he eventually teaches, that we see him teach other people like later on. So like if we see like, okay, patience, if we saw him actually dealing with him being impatient with the student and he realizes, okay, you know what? This is the wrong way to do things. Maybe I should, or like,
this is not the way.
Yeah, this is not the way. Or holding on to attachments. That's one of the things too.
Well, or even,
being afraid to let go.
He's always talking about the dark side and how, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, all this other stuff. It would be interesting to see Yoda actually falling a victim and sort of brushing up against the dark side.
Well, yeah, we saw that a little bit in Clone Wars when he was, like I said, in that episode where he was searching for knowledge as far as becoming a Force ghost. They brought those things to him, and he had to go be put through these different tests. One of them, of course, was being fear, and he had to fight himself or the evil side of himself, which was creepy. It was like Golem or something like in versus Yoda. It was weird, but yeah, I mean, I think when we see different things like that, you understand where this wisdom comes from, because wisdom comes from experience.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, a younger Yoda could show that.
Yeah, and I definitely think that if we're going to show Yoda not being in a leadership position, it's got to be because of some sort of personal growth or something. Another thing that we haven't really explored yet is maybe there was a traumatic moment in his life that prevented him from being fully able to take on that responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, like...
That would be interesting.
I mean, I wonder if Dooku was the only one that he's ever lost.
Well, it also makes you wonder, because the High Republic era would be too soon for Dooku.
Well, of course.
But what does make you wonder, though, if we're going to see... Because even if he's not the head of the council, he's a prominent teacher. So there's got to be other Padawans that he's had, or...
Yeah.
I mean, it's really... On one hand... He has to be in this, but on the other hand, it's the way they presented it. It's really difficult to see where he fits in with this.
Well, even in the Jedi Lost book, they were talking about how, like Dooku was actually sneaking around, and there was like these different statues that they had different monuments at the Jedi Temple of people who left the Order and went and became Sith Lords. And I'm just wondering, like, okay, well, which one of those guys, like, did at what era or what point did this happen, and how did Yoda respond to that?
Yeah, and you also have to, they wouldn't be doing their job if they're kind of like, okay, like 3 out of 6 of these guys was, this guy's student. Maybe we don't get him to teach Padawans anymore.
Yeah, exactly. You're just a field op at this point.
Exactly. It's kind of like, you know what? Right. Maybe you don't teach. Like, pretty much like a high percentage of your students, like we got statues of your guys that went to the dark side. So maybe we don't have you teaching anymore.
Yeah. So the next one is, will we learn more about Yoda's past and origin?
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah. So let's see. As Star Wars prepares to potentially delve into the origins of the Yoda species with a child on the Mandalorian, the High Republic has an opportunity to explore parts of his story as well. I love to see Yoda interact with his people, especially now that I know that there was another of his species born around 150 years after the High Republic takes place. Yoda would no doubt be busy teaching young Padawans, but that doesn't mean relevant people from his past won't track him down in between.
Yeah, maybe Yoda was busy doing something else, too.
Sowing his royal oats.
Yeah, exactly. Wielding his lightsaber, as it were. I mean, I would like to know a little bit more definitively about his origins. And I don't think it's an accident that all this is happening and it's coinciding with The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Because it does seem to me like some of this stuff's going to tie together. I definitely think in season 2 of The Mandalorian, we're going to learn more about that species.
Sure.
And I think it's then going to be supported by these High Republic books. Now, because the High Republic books have been delayed, I wonder if, in a way, this first book was actually going to deal with anything with Yoda.
Well, maybe that, and maybe that's why they delayed the book because of the Mandalorian.
I wouldn't think so, because it would have been the perfect setup for the Mandalorian. But I mean, I know what you're saying. You're saying that they would want to reveal it first in The Mandalorian, but they don't necessarily have to reveal anything. You know, they could still drop the Baby Yoda bombs if they want in The Mandalorian, like some key crazy knowledge about the species. But they could have done a little bit of setup, because I don't necessarily think that Yoda's going to be featured really prominently like in book 1, you know. I think he might be mentioned or he might make an appearance in it. But I think it's as stories go on that you're going to get more and more information.
That's funny because that's actually the next one.
Love how we're rolling into these guys.
Yeah. It says, will Yoda be a prominent character in the High Republic? I mean, that's literally the next question.
Wow, like it's... Thank you, Cinema Blend. Oh, and by the way, if you guys actually want to check out the Cinema Blend article, we have it linked in the description. So be sure you check that out. And hey, while you're in the description, go ahead and hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. And then, of course, right below the link is a link to donate to this channel so you can actually help support us so we can bring more content like this to you. All right, so will he factor prominently in the High Republic?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I'm wondering, too, because it's almost like that Luke Skywalker problem that you can have. They almost had it in The Last Jedi, but when they were talking about Luke maybe being in The Mandalorian Season 2, or even beyond, like Season 3 or something, the problem is if you start putting a Luke Skywalker in there, there's a danger that it could take a little bit of attention away from the Mandalorian, who's the main character. And I think in a similar sense, if you put Yoda in there too prominently, it might overshadow. I won't say necessarily take away from, but it might overshadow these other characters.
Well, I think his thing, and see, for this, in this particular situation, I think is relevant. Whereas,
it's definitely relevant.
With
but
Mandalorian bringing Luke Skywalker into that, although you could see why, because of course they existed around the same in that same period. You know, the galaxy is huge, so Luke could be somewhere else doing God knows what.
Well, I think in that case, I think Ahsoka is kind of the stand-in for Luke.
Exactly.
Okay, we don't want to bring in Luke because that could be like too big, but Ahsoka would serve the same purpose. Like anything that Luke was going to do, she could do.
Well, like you do Luke, you got to do him like very gingerly, like a cameo.
Yeah.
Like at the very end or something like of a season, you bring Luke out and Ahsoka's like, oh, Luke Skywalker, pleasure to meet you. And then they go off and it's like, whoa, okay. And then, you kind of deal with that somewhere else.
I can see it too, because you could totally it would be effective and actually kind of cool, but it would also be cheesy if they did one of those, like they just got some other actor, they just show him from behind, so you kind of see an over the shoulder with the cloak and his hairstyle basically, but it's not Mark Hamill, you know.
It would be hilarious if she called him Sky Guy.
Oh man. And then he ignite the green.
Yep. Cut her down.
Just like you see her head rolling around or whatever. It's like, yeah, I'm not my father.
Maybe he is.
No, there you go.
But but having Yoda in the High Republic makes perfect sense, and I think you need him. I think you really do need to, because Yoda is like the focal point of a lot of things as it pertains to the Jedi. He's the guy he's kind of like that conduit. Like everything kind of flows through him, much like the Force. But because he's the oldest member, I mean, he's the oldest Jedi we know. So for him to be in this era is like, or not really mentioned too much, is kind of like odd. It would be more odd if he wasn't, because that like, okay, he's Yoda.
Well, and you know that he's around, and you know that, but it makes me wonder though, because this is taking place in the High Republic era. I don't think that they're headquartered on Coruscant yet.
No, I don't believe so.
It was that other.
It might be Jeddah.
Yeah, it might be Jeddah, or it might be something like that. I remember they did mention it. I remember that.
It might be Jeddah, and that would be cool too, because now you had that callback to Rogue One when they had Chirrut and Baze outside the temple and things like that.
Yeah, the Guardians of the Wills and all that.
Yeah. It's
possible that you could do the whole thing without Yoda, because you could just be concentrating on.
And I'm not saying you don't take, you have your character, new characters. You don't want to make the whole thing about Yoda. But his presence definitely needs to be felt, though, throughout
Well,
this
and
thing.
you can say that that's the way it is in episodes 1 through 3. I mean, episode 1 through 3 is about Anakin.
Right.
And eventually Obi-Wan. Mm-hmm. And the Emperor, and basically how that, and Padme, and 3PO, and no. It's like, it's basically about that core. It's the story of Anakin, and Yoda plays a very prominent role in that.
Right.
So he's definitely a presence that's felt through the whole thing, but it doesn't really necessarily concentrate on him.
Yeah, you don't want it to be centered on Yoda per se, but...
Right, and if they do something similar to that, I could see that, because you're right, the absence of Yoda would be really strange.
Yeah.
No matter where they're focusing. I mean, at the very least, they'd have to mention his name. Mm-hmm. Because he's just... But then again, it's almost like playing devil's advocate, though. If he's not really on the council or the head of the council or something like that, they could. I mean, look at how many of those council guys, we didn't really focus on a lot of those guys. Like, what's the one with the weird neck and the little head or whatever?
Honestly, he was always doing one of these numbers.
We don't... I mean, I barely even know the guy's name.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, Yoda is...
He could just be another guy on the council at that point.
Yeah,
he could be. We don't know.
He could be, or he could not be, but the fact of we know who he is and who he becomes.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's almost like you have to acknowledge that transition.
But I'm just saying his function, though. His function in the story could be like long neck dude. Help us out, Jason. I know you're watching this.
But I think what you have to, even showing Yoda as a teacher, I mean, like, once again, like, even in that role, it's like, all right, if he's just teaching Padawans, that's his thing. You know, you can understand, at least you can see, okay, what he was like and his growth and development, because that's one of those things that you really don't see too much, at least in the films. Like, when you see the films, okay, you see he's just trying to meditate and trying to figure out what the heck is going on with the Senate and the, you know, and this, he's feeling the dark side, but he doesn't know where it's coming from, and he's trying to figure that out. So by the time we get to Revenge of the Sith, like, that's when Yoda really shows up, because now he's like, okay, I got to deal with, Anakin going to the dark side. I got to deal with this Emperor coming up, and, there's a lot of things that are shifting going on. Now he's got to make this plan about what we're going to do with the twins, Luke and Leia, with Obi-Wan. So, and then of course we don't see him again until 5 and 6 when he's older. So yeah, there's a lot of different mechanisms that's going on here and you can see the growth more so in Yoda the closer we get to episode 4.
Right, but I mean, I think my point is like this. So, and I'll agree with it, because to me, it's almost like, okay, so I was watching the 4K version of Pitch Black the other day, like yesterday, I think. And because it just came in the mail. It just came out. It was actually supposed to come out on my birthday, ironically, a month ago or 3 weeks ago, but it was delayed. So I'm watching it. And it reminded me of a conversation that we had either last week or the week before, where we were talking about, okay, why are you bringing in Vin Diesel to play Groot? Mm-hmm. Do you really need Vin Diesel to play Groot, or is it just you want to say
that he's
the one and pay him a boatload of money when literally anybody could have said the I am Groot lines? Mm-hmm. It's almost like if you're going to bring Yoda into the High Republic, you got to have him doing something.
Of course.
Because otherwise that role could be fulfilled by any other Jedi. So if you're going to bring in Yoda, it's because you want to either shed some light on Yoda's past, which I think is the big thing.
Right.
Because the way they're looking at it is probably basically what you've been saying this whole time. It's like, okay, if we're covering this era of the Jedi, it's not just the High Republic era. We're dealing with the Jedi in this era. Mm-hmm. They're the focal point.
Right.
If you're making the Jedi the focal point and Yoda's around,
I mean, he's and that's
the fans are going to want to know, because it's kind of like, well, okay, I don't know who these other guys are. What's Yoda doing? Not
only that, but I mean, he's arguably still the most powerful Jedi that you have.
Yeah, you have to figure. Like, if he was like 300 years old, you can maybe make the argument that he's still on his way up.
Right.
Especially with the way they appear to age. But yeah, if he's 700, we're only talking like a 200-year age gap, which is probably like 5 years in human years or something. It's like, yeah, he's probably up there.
Yeah,
you know?
He's definitely like a master at this point. He's definitely, because he has to because he's teaching. So, I mean, that alone.
But it makes me wonder, which kind of goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of the episode, is like, where does he rank, though? Like, is he like the Mace Windu of the High Republic era?
Yeah, exactly.
Or, because honestly, I'd like to see Mace's origin story.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I don't know why. It's just like, he's always fascinated me as a character. You know,
well, he has a lot of depth to him because he's different. He's very...
he's kind of unlike any of the other Jedi we've seen, if you really stop and think about it.
And you have to want to know, like, what made him so powerful.
Right. See, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Besides basically the character development and the fact that, you know, he's not only does he have a very rich character, and he obviously has a very rich backstory, but that's my thing. The fact that he's the number 2, like if he was just like Ki-Adi-Mundi or any of these other guys, I would be curious, but it wouldn't make me as curious as like, okay, this guy's like the number 2 guy.
Yeah, and it's like, how far away is he from Yoda?
How far away is he from Yoda? Even though there was a time where I could have answered that question, actually. I remember he's pretty far away, but he's not as far away as you would think. And that makes me really want to know more about this guy.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, he's the second most powerful Jedi during that era. Where did he come from, and how did he, you know...
ascend to power? How did he get that rank and role? And
who taught him? As far as I know, I know that, you know, there's probably all the encyclopedia geeks that know, you know, pretty much, okay, Mace, you know, was taught by this guy, who was then taught by this guy, who was taught by this guy. Yeah, I mean...
It's like the Bible, like...
Yeah,
you know.
the genealogy thing, exactly. It's like, and I never really... Like, I'd read through that stuff, but it's like... It doesn't fascinate me that much, you know, unless you tie it into some kind of a character thing. I mean, obviously, when it plays a prominent role in the story, like Plagueis being Palpatine's teacher, I had always wondered who was the master of Palpatine. Because by the time you get around to Palpatine, you're like, well, who on earth could keep this guy in check, you know?
Well, that's also,
and Vader, too.
But that also brings to another question, though. Who taught Yoda?
Yeah, well, maybe that's...
And that's what I'm saying. Like, maybe that's what I'm saying. Like, we don't know who...
That's true. Yoda's teacher could actually be around. Now,
or he could be the head of the...
Well, that answer was actually in, like, the whole Star Wars data bank, which is on StarWars.com. You know, it has a lot of this information, too. You know, like, you can look that stuff up. I mean, but at the same time, seeing a name is a lot different than actually getting into that story.
True.
And even if you get into the story from maybe like a comic or something, it's like, it's not as rooted. It's not the same thing as like Yoda and Dooku, or Palpatine and Anakin, or Obi-Wan and Anakin. You know, it's when it gets in, and it's not just because they were in the films, because there's a lot of things that are in the novels. There's a lot of characters that are in the novels. I mean, look at Thrawn. Thrawn, you really understood, and this is even back during the times of Legends. I'm not even talking about the new canon stuff. During the time of Legends, Thrawn was so fleshed out, he felt just as real to us as a Vader, as a Tarkin, as a Palpatine.
Yeah.
So much so that we wanted him in live action or in the... We're still waiting for that. Hey, he might pop up in The Mandalorian Season 2 at this rate.
I know, right? It's big. Spoiler.
So you mean I didn't actually accidentally roll us into the next question?
No, not this time.
I was doing so well, too.
Yeah, you're on the roll.
What number are we even on?
We're almost done, actually.
Aw.
We actually probably have about... So we're at like 7, so we got like 3 more or something. So this one is Yoda going to teach in the same way that he taught Luke?
I don't think so, only because if you really look at the way that Yoda taught everybody else, even... We don't really get to see a whole lot of it during the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, but we do get to see a little bit of it.
Well, the fact that he taught younglings primarily.
He did teach younglings. Well, he was the guy that was always like your first. He's like the homeroom teacher for Jedi, you know? It's like, he's like the first one. He teaches you all the foundational stuff, and then you're assigned a master at that point.
Right. Because here it says, Yoda's teaching methods in Empire Strikes Back were pretty out there, and I'm not sure if it's because he's just an unconventional teacher or he just got a little kooky hanging out on Dagobah. We do know that he'll be in charge of teaching some Padawans, and I'd like to see if he's still jumping on people's backs and yelling, or if he's going to be more focused and perhaps no nonsense Yoda. Honestly, it's hard to say because this is supposed to be towards the peak of the Jedi Order, so it's hard to say how difficult the Jedi training program is, if there's any threats as substantial as what they were dealing with during the Clone Wars.
So in other words, is he a trainer like Mark Drum?
You had to bring that
I
up,
did. Well, come on, man. I mean, even when the guy, blame Cinema Blend. Don't blame me. Tell the story of Mark Drum.
I will not.
I will tell the story of Mark Drum. So, everybody's got to know that.
Maybe.
Long story short, there was this guy that apparently ran a gym or something like that you ran into.
Out of nowhere.
And he started asking you, like, if you worked out or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, like, how much you can bench or something like that. And then out of nowhere, this guy just jumps on his back and starts. And the thing that's funny was, besides this being like the most awkward, super crazy conversation, you ended up running into him like two or three other times.
Yeah, man. He had me like doing, because he stopped me one day by this hotel. No, we didn't go in. But he's flagging me down, and I'm thinking like I have a flat tire or something, or there's something wrong with my car. I
forgot about that one.
Yeah, so that's why. So I'm thinking something's wrong with my car, or he needs some help or something like that.
He needs help.
Well, yeah, definitely. So then he gets out of the car, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he was like, hey, man, what's going on? And then, how's it been? I'm like, do I know you? And I've forgotten, like, and as he keeps going on, I realized, like, oh, you're the crazy trainer dude. And, yeah, I'm just kind of like, all right, trying to pacify him. And then he just, well, let's see what you can do. How much are you squatting now? So he just jumps on my back out of nowhere like he's Yoda and tries to have me doing squats in the middle of this parking lot. And I'm like, yeah, dude, I got to go. So, yeah, that's that's part of the Mark Drum saga.
That's part of the Mark Drum saga. That's the part that everybody will. But, it basically, I bring that up. Not just to, come up with something that's kind of embarrassing and weird. It's kind of like, really, dude? This is where you're going? But it's because, if you think about it, this guy probably thought that in some whacked out way, he was helping your development as a lifter.
Yeah, right.
And it's one of those things that, and I imagine that he's probably like that when he trains people.
Yeah, he's super intense, one of those type of guys.
And there's all kinds of these guys that train a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think Yoda's thing with kids, though, I think that's one of the bigger, and that's when you hear like truly remarkable the mind of a child is. I think he just loves cultivating that and like awakening the wonder in the child to explore and cause them to want to seek knowledge. And I think that's kind of Yoda's role as far as a teacher. And then now you kind of go off on your own and you just kind of like, oh, okay, well, let me see this and let me see that.
Well, but what's interesting, though, is that when you brought up the Jedi Lost book, though, and it's true because there was the big deal when Yoda chose Dooku.
Yeah.
And apparently Yoda does take on Padawans, but it's not
it's rare. It's
a usual thing.
And even with this whole thing with Luke, like, he really didn't want to train Luke, but he kind of realized he kind of had to.
Yeah, he didn't really have a choice.
Yeah,
and you have to understand that the whole unorthodox nature of the training was the fact that
he had to get him ready quick.
It wasn't like he was in the Jedi temple,
Right.
He was on like this swamp planet, basically, so he had to make use of what was around him, and there had been no Jedi, and I'm sure he's a little rusty.
Well, yeah, I think it's just, honestly, I just felt like, you got a certain period of time, I got to get you ready to go confront Vader and the Emperor.
Yeah.
I know both of them very well. I know Anakin, and I've squared off with Palpatine before, so I know what you're getting yourself into. You got to be ready for this. Obi-Wan's gone, so it's not like he's around to really. I mean, he still can come back, I guess, in Force Ghost form, but with Yoda there, he realized, okay, I need to expedite your process.
I think it's the difference between when you have a trainer and you're going into the gym and you're training to whatever your fitness goals might be. Let's just say it's to like lose weight and gain some muscle, like get kind of toned up or whatever. Okay, there's a difference between that or when you're actually training for a film, and so they have to get you in shape, and they have to get you cut and everything enough for certain scenes that you're going to do, and they have to train you. Maybe they have to train you in sword fighting, or maybe they have to train you in like some martial arts or something. They're going to train you enough that you can pull off a couple of moves on film. But it's not like how they would train you if they were doing it formally.
You're right. It's almost like when a woman needs to fit into a wedding dress.
Right.
Like, okay, I need to lose like 30 pounds within the next 6 months because I'm getting married and I need to fit in my wedding dress. Okay, well, here's your meal plan. Here's this. We just got to go high intensity for like a couple of weeks. Versus like if you're just trying to, I just want to do a lifestyle change. I want to live a healthier lifestyle. Okay, I'm going to gradually push you.
Right. It's going to be more of an organic kind of a thing. It's going to be more of a growth type of a thing. Or in this case, it's like you said, no, you got to go out. You got to face Vader. You got to face the Emperor. We got to train you. It's almost like you're training the person for a task.
Yeah.
It's versus overall. Whereas
teaching the kid the test, the ACT.
Yeah.
Versus just giving them the knowledge anyway.
Right. And I mean, I think that's the difference between the way because the Jedi back then, it was like they were basically going through this formal training process.
Yeah, the trials were like an extensive process. Like even before you even got to the Jedi trials, like just the curriculum, like when you had to read, like when you're reading stuff with in Master and Apprentice, when Obi-Wan had to do those studies and stuff, and Qui-Gon made him like read all these books, and he's just like, ugh.
Yeah,
I don't want to do all that, but
there's a lot of academics involved, and there's a lot of training, and then if you think about it, it's like you said, you go through this basically like liberal arts version of Jedi training with Yoda, and then you're hooked up with a Padawan or a master in order to actually then go a little bit more intense and get a little bit deeper. But in this case, Yoda just had to basically train him for this task and get him ready for this one particular thing. And I think that could be, which is probably a discussion for another time, but that could have been also what led to Luke's disillusionment, is that he didn't really have the formal Jedi training. It was almost like he got that crash course.
The Cliff Notes version.
The Cliff Notes version, yeah. And he had to, and then it's kind of...
And he had the text, but the text isn't experience either.
Right, and it's not the same as... And I'm sure Force Ghost popped up like, popcorn, basically, like whenever he had a question. But at the same time, it's a little bit different. And I think that's what we actually saw. I think that was the problem. So it's going to be interesting to see if Yoda's teaching style, and I understand what the question is like, okay, well, is he going to be basically the same as when he's, like 800 or 900 years old? And I think the answer, quite simply, is just, he has like 200 more years of knowledge by the time of Episode 1.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that his style is going to be that different. But it could, because, with experience, you learn.
You make adjustments.
Sure. It's kind of like, well, it's not just the information, like I'm learning more information that I have to teach them. It's like you're learning styles and you're learning ways to do it and everything. Like, oh, this didn't really work. Let me try this. So.
Yep. And so I think the next one is, does Yoda agree with the current state of the Jedi Order? One thing I can't help but notice that from his High Republic concept art is that Yoda is dressed to the nines.
Got a little Lando in him.
Yeah. And not one, but two photos. In the prequel and original trilogies, his clothes look far rattier, which is weird in the prequel trilogy because he's about as high up as you can go in the Jedi Order. It makes me wonder if Yoda was on board with this era of opulence, and that may play into why he's not more involved in the Jedi Order than he is in the future.
He doesn't just work out to fit his clothes.
Yeah, man. Sometimes, Yoda could clean up, when he needs to.
Well, it is interesting.
Impress Yaddle.
I mean, the reality of this is that, the people who are drawing this stuff up are probably like, hey, let's jazz Yoda up a little bit. Well, I mean, I don't know if that much thought's been put into it. Maybe.
Well, and one of the things that you and I have talked about too is that, and you brought this up, was that, during this High Republic time, like everything kind of looked like Naboo at that point. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, by the time you get to the wars, now everything looks more beat up, rattier. You're going through a lot more battles. You got stuff going on.
That's true. There could be almost more of a regality to life back then, and to definitely the Jedi back then.
Even the lightsabers look different. Like I said, they have more of that whole, like, Knights of the Round Table vibe to it. So you can understand the more regalness, and there's probably more of a air of grace that comes with being a Jedi at that time period.
Well, the other thing that, I think all this is true, but I think the other thing that you got to look at too is just look even on plain old Earth, right? Mm-hmm. Fashions change from year to year. A lot of times even from season to season.
Yeah, when you're younger, you dress flashier.
Sure.
When you're older, you don't care. It's like, whatever, it's comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm just put it on. Can I button my pants? That's it.
Pretty much. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that, fashions at that time are a little bit different, that Yoda's a little younger and he's maybe a little bit more concerned about his appearance. Maybe because he's not just sitting on a chair or whatever in a council room.
Yeah, he's out and mingling with the people.
He's got to put a little bit more effort in. I don't know. It's one of those things that I do think that eventually, if it hasn't been thought of immediately, eventually I think we're going to see some significance to maybe the way that he dresses or whatever. But honestly, I don't know. It's almost like when people try to make it out, like when Anakin started wearing more black clothing, like that was his thing. Symbol that he was going to the dark side kind of a thing.
That was just like his little...
I don't think so. I think that was just his deal. And if you look at the way that he was in, like, episode 1, he was a kid. But even from episode 2, he had almost like this armor type stuff on, where by the time of 3, his outfit was a little bit more Jedi-like. It was a little bit more of a Jedi robe kind of thing going on in certain instances.
Yeah, like he had more, like his was more brown leather.
Yeah.
In episode 2. And then by the time we get to 3... he's got the full black, but then, of course he did, now that he's a Jedi now, no longer a Padawan, so now his hair is different, he's grew it out, he's
again, and
he's kind of has his own.
And I think some of it probably had to do with the fact of, when you're going on a mission or something like that, you're going to dress a little bit more for that.
I don't know that, but I think it's just more imposing. Like, Anakin had more of that, I want you to respect me when I walk in, versus like
very military.
Very military. Like, whereas Obi-Wan was more kind of like, I'm laid back. He's more like
a sage.
Yeah, he's kind of like the guy that's like, okay, I want to look unassuming to you at first.
Yep.
Whereas Anakin wants to announce, no, I'm that guy.
Well, and not only that, but I think that, in a lot of cases too, I don't know if we're reading too much into some of this stuff, but
possibly.
It could be, yeah. But I think that, again, we have to see it in context.
True.
All we're seeing is like Yoda against this gray background, basically dressed the way he's dressed. We haven't seen this outfit in context.
True.
So I think until we do, and I think that's the answer to a lot of these questions, to be honest.
Oh yeah, we're just all speculating at this point.
Well, yeah, and it's true. I mean, these are basically 9 questions, and again, they came from Cinema Blend, but by extension, they are questions that you and I have thought of and speculated before we even knew Yoda was in the High Republic, where we're like, well, if he is, what then? Mm-hmm. And we've brought some of this stuff up pretty much in a light manner because we didn't really spend a whole lot of time on it. But I do remember when we were covering the High Republic, we did cover the High Republic on one of our shows.
Yeah.
And we brought this up. We brought some of this stuff up. At least I'm pretty sure we brought some of this stuff up. Just in case somebody goes back and is like, you guys didn't talk about Yoda at all.
No, we definitely
But we
did.
were thinking about Yoda. But the thing is, I think a lot of times there's these questions that you start to think about, like, well, if this, then that kind of a thing, especially when you're bringing in Yoda, because if you think about it, we don't really know a whole lot about him, which is a really weird thing to say because he's been this character that's been in our consciousness for like 40 years, just about.
You just know him based upon the little bit of time that you've had with him.
Yeah, and it's mostly based on the circumstances more than the character.
Right.
We know who Yoda is in this circumstance, but we don't actually know a whole lot of background about him. It's almost like kind of when you're working with somebody and and if you don't spend any personal time with them, you only know them from work. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that if you see them like at a store, it's so odd because you're only used to seeing them in a particular place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like, no different than, the dearly departed Chadwick Boseman. Like we saw him as Black Panther and maybe in some other things, but like you really didn't, until his passing, you really didn't know so much about him. I mean, heck, we didn't even know he was battling cancer.
Right.
So now we finding out, people are finding out like, oh, Denzel Washington paid for him to go to this acting school when he was, graduated from Howard. Some people didn't even know he went to Howard University. And, now you're hearing stories from his roommates and you're hearing all these different things. So like now it's like, okay, yeah, we saw him, we knew him as Black Panther, but some people forgot that he played James Brown and Thurgood Marshall. And so now people are going back and kind of like looking at the depth of him and some of his other stuff from...
Right, it puts it into a different context. And they did the same thing with Prince. All this stuff came out about Prince and we're like, really?
Yep.
And, it's kind of like, oh, now you see him in a slightly different light instead of only in this particular circumstance. So these are the kinds of things that I think even in the fictional world, you have Yoda where we see him in the events of the prequel trilogy. We see him obviously in the original trilogy and even a little bit in the sequels. But it's not really a lot of the stuff that would tell you a lot about him.
Right.
Or his species.
Right.
Which is, I think, why everybody got so cranked up about Baby Yoda was like, ooh, we see like another one of these things. And I mean, it's true. You saw Yaddle, but that doesn't really count.
For 2 seconds, basically.
And we don't know anything about her.
Yeah.
It's like zero. We don't even know what she sounds like. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like a visual kind of thing. That's like seeing somebody in a crowd.
Definitely.
So I think that it's going to be a really interesting thing to not just see some of the action-oriented, like, oh, what's Yoda going to do during this era, or, is he going to teach? Is he going to be whatever? But it's learning more about him in context now, in context of his experiences, in context of, his life, his views, like seeing things through his eyes, because we don't really see the story through his point of view.
Right.
We always see the story in the prequels, it's through Anakin's point of view. Or Obi-Wan. Or, in the original trilogy, it's Luke. We don't really ever see things through Yoda's perspective, through his lens.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That's a very good point.
I'll never forget the first time, that we saw where he was vulnerable. He's like, hurry. It's just like, I mean, he sounded so just like completely traumatic, and it's just, I mean, that was something that was very strange. But that was another layer of his personality.
Yep.
That it's like, oh, okay. Now, we see this. Or like when we see him in The Empire Strikes Back and he's all acting like silly and goofy or whatever. And then all of a sudden he just turns like stone cold serious. And you're like, is this guy like schizo, or does he have medication on Dagobah that he takes or whatever? But then when you see that in context of, no, he kind of does this as like a teaching mechanism, and it's also part of his personality. He's a prankster. He likes to be silly, but then he knows when to be serious.
Yep.
Okay, fine. We know that about Yoda now, but we needed the prequels to put that into a perspective.
Definitely.
All right, so what's the next question?
The last one is, do Yoda experiences in the High Republic influence later decisions? What I'm most interested in seeing in the High Republic era is the rules of the Jedi Order mirrored? If the rules of the Jedi Order mirror the ones that we've come to know during the prequel and sequel trilogies? Rules such as the Jedi not having families and ideally being removed from their families as early as possible seem rather harsh and extreme measures. I wouldn't be surprised if in this era of opulence there was initially some loosening of these restrictions, and there were certain events eventually that caused the Jedi or Yoda to make changes.
Yeah, I would definitely think that's, it's almost like you saw, like I'll never forget, I went to see my dad in the hospital one day, and there was actually a sign in the hospital bed that said, "Please do not have sex with the patients." And as much as that was like cracking me up, my next thought was, holy crap.
You have to make a sign about that?
Somebody actually, either an incident or there had to be multiple incidences because they actually felt a need to make a sign. So if a sign was necessary, that meant that this was a thing.
Oh, conjugal visits
exactly. It's like some sort of medical conjugal visit, and then it's kind of like, well, how long was this person in the hospital for that they're just like, dude,
hey,
you
man,
know, I need something more than this IV stuck in me.
Some nurses just can't.
There's that too, but I mean, it just blew my mind because they actually felt a sign was needed,
right?
Or like the caution, coffee is hot,
right?
It's like, well, we know that, but apparently, enough people don't that they need to make a sign, and so you have to factor this in to the whole Star Wars part of it, where you say, okay, if the Jedi have all these crazy rules, somewhere along the line, something must have been the catalyst for those rules.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's where rules usually come from. Is like,
right,
because you see, like, okay, or I know because if this happens, this starts you down a path, or this leads you to this particular situation.
Or like a bunch of people can't handle it. Like, right, you get for a while, but then you get a generation or something. It's like 2 out of the 200 people we have are cool, but
yeah,
unfortunately, you got to make the rule for the majority.
Not the exceptions.
Exactly.
Yeah, one of those things was like, I know for the Vapad lightsaber form, that was actually banned. In the Jedi Order, like you could only
Mace
yep.
uses that,
and
right?
there's only a couple of Yoda, of course, being one of them. He knows how to use it, and of course, Mace knows how to use it. But that was like pretty much restricted from like most of the students, because it's like it's too tempting or it can allow you to go too far too quick, and you really have to truly have control. Which once again is bringing me to the point of like why I would love to see something on Mace, because why is he able to
why is he able to and allowed to use it? It's kind of like Yoda turns in like, all right, you and I are number 1 and 2, we get to do this.
Yeah,
the rules apply to everybody else, and that's something else I would like to see more in Yoda's thing too, is like, is there a situation where he feels that it's fair that rules can apply to everyone else, but maybe not necessarily to him? Was there some experience maybe that happened during the High Republic, or maybe it happened before? I mean, let's face it, he's 700 years old, or so, like 7-something in the High Republic. So there's another 700 years before that happened, So it'll be interesting to see if they go back in flashbacks or anything, because remember, so far, from what we know, the High Republic is strictly books and maybe comics. I'm pretty sure comics are included now. Like, I remember at first it was only going to be books, and now I think they've expanded it to comics, but that's it. We're not even getting, as far as we know, there's no animated series that's going to feature this, and there's no films, even though I think you and I both agree that there definitely should be films. I mean, it's like, okay, what are we going to get? Because there's something that's on the release date for 2022, 25, 27. I mean, you do have kind of a cool thing here, which, by the way, has been fully fleshed out. Because the authors did what Lucasfilm should have done, which is got in a room and planned the thing out.
Right.
And we know they didn't. But the authors actually went in And we did a show on that too, where we actually featured as our main topic
different authors.
The whole roundtable of the authors. And basically, it was kind of like when we first started talking about the whole High Republic thing. When the news broke that that's what they were going to do, it wasn't too long after that all these authors got together and said, listen, we got this story, we got this era we want to cover. Let's get in a room. Let's figure out the story arc, at least where it is right now, and then let's divide up who's going to tell what story in what medium.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're getting these books, and unfortunately we're delayed. I think the first one's coming out in January now.
Yeah.
But, they got this whole era. Why not extend the brand and put that in the movies? I mean, because once you see a movie on the High Republic and then you see, there's all these books on it, it's going to sell it.
Definitely.
Why would you have an era like this
and not capitalize on
it? I mean, it's only in the books. I mean, how many people are even going to know about it?
Not only that, but I mean, like I said, it's great content where, that's where you can really take Star Wars in a completely different direction, and you can create brand new stories, sagas, things out of that.
Yeah,
that people can fall in love with. And so now it's brand new, it's fresh. You're not tied to the Skywalker thing. You don't have to worry about stepping on like, okay, well, this is too close to episode 4 or whatever the case may be. It's a wide open platform.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to figure like Mace is probably like what, 40s, 50s or something, and in the prequels.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can, if you featured him in, say, his 20s or 30s, you could even go up to 20 or 30 years before episode 1.
Yeah.
Let's do some Mace stuff. I mean, the nice thing about the High Republic era, the funny thing is they talk about how it's 200 years before, but if I'm not mistaken, I think it stops at 200 years before. I think it was like 200 to 400 years or something like that. So, because I remember there was enough of a window in there.
Well, yeah, if you just kept it at 200, that's a heck of a long time.
Sure it is. But, what's nice about it, though, is it's close enough that if you're doing a series of, 10, 12, 20 books or something like that, you could actually eventually get close enough to the Phantom Menace, let's say, to start to get a Mace Windu origin story.
True.
Or, any of these guys. And basically enrich the universe without necessarily... Well, it's almost like it's the best of both worlds, because you can give people familiar characters, but you're not telling the same story again.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least we hope not.
Yeah, it should be fun. Like I said, I hope they do it. I really think that that's where they should go, but we'll see.
All right, well, what do you guys think about this whole thing? We've just covered, thanks to Cinema Blend, for providing this article, but we just went over this article by them that focused on 9 questions that we have about Yoda and the High Republic. My question to you is, what questions do you have about Yoda in the High Republic that maybe we didn't cover here? Let us know in the comments section. We're still chatting. We still got to do the Clear Your Mind segment. So we still have some things that, we have to talk about before we wrap the show up. So if you're watching this, I almost said if you're watching this live, if you're watching this premiere Friday here night by now it's probably like 9, but if you're watching us live or premiere, I want to say that, right? Then go ahead and chat it. But if you guys are watching the rebroadcast, then hey, leave it in the comments section. As Jason can tell you, we've gotten in some really good conversations in the comment sections on a bunch of different episodes. So, on one hand, I'm glad that he's watching all these other episodes that we have, because I would encourage everybody to go back and, check out a bunch of stuff. And we get into some really, especially when we started going live and everybody started chatting with us, we get into some great conversations. But all right, you ready to go into this?
Yes, sir.
All right, here we go. Clear your mind. All right, so this is where we actually take questions that have been submitted to us. Like I said, when we're live, obviously you guys, are chatting and basically asking questions or submitting topic ideas or just chatting about overall Star Wars. But every week we always feature 2 questions that have been submitted to us that we choose. So who is our first person?
First person is Wilson Tacoma. And the question is, do you think that George Lucas should return to Star Wars?
Wow, that's a good one. And you know what's funny about this Clear Your Mind is I haven't seen either one of these questions.
No, you haven't.
So usually, when you give me the outlines and stuff like that, again, I try not to think about this stuff too much. Like I purposely wait to try to have as immediate a reaction. But this time it's super immediate because I haven't even seen it. And that's a really good question. I think that George Lucas should return to writing Star Wars. I think that he should return to consulting Star Wars. I do not think that he should return to directing Star Wars.
Okay.
And
I can rock with that.
Yeah, because, and look, I know that you feel the same because we've talked about this a gazillion times. Is that...
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the writing of Star Wars is good. I mean, I think that I just want to know, like, how many stories does he truly have in him,
Well, that's another good point, too, because let's not forget that it's so funny how time works. And especially when the saga, or the whole series, really, has been turned over to somebody else. Because during the prequel era, it was George Lucas ruined my childhood, George Lucas can't write, story is terrible, or you'd get a lot of people who were like us who said, no, the stories are actually really good, it's just the execution that's bad.
Right.
But either way, everybody's like, George Lucas is ruining his own creation, it's time to let other people take the reins and create stories, which I actually initially agreed with too. And still do, because if you bring in the right people to tell the stories, it could be fantastic.
Well, see, this is my thing. I definitely will piggyback off what you're saying. I think that much like how George took Filoni under his wing, I think George needs to take certain authors under his wing. And I think there needs to be a symbiance between the two where Filoni and authors and things like that who can write great stories.
Or like screenwriters.
And that's what I'm saying. And just who really truly understand Star Wars to the depth that almost a Filoni understands it. Because like I've said before, Filoni is the gatekeeper now. So it's like, okay, well, once Filoni is gone, hopefully not for a long time, but like, anything can happen. Well, what happens to the franchise? What happens to, like, if he's the only person who really understands Star Wars to this depth, then everything subsequent from that is going to be hit and miss. Where I think if George kind of had like, all right, I've established like kind of a consortium of authors like Claudia Gray, and find some other good screenwriters and things like that, and really have kind of like I don't want to say a crash course, but like really like break down Star Wars with them as they create content. So then that way, if and when George Lucas, passes on or Filoni, something happens with him, you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
So I think
that's a great idea.
To that point, I think that's how George Lucas should return to Star Wars.
Yeah, you're basically saying he starts his own Jedi Academy.
Yeah, Lucas Academy or something like that.
Something like, okay, here's how to do Star Wars.
Exactly.
Here's what Star Wars is. Here's what it's about. Here's how to write it. Here's how to do that. And that's true because that's actually an extension.
Here's why I stay away from certain things like, oh, where's Yoda's origin? Because it almost becomes like the whole thing we just got done talking about with Yoda. Like, okay, what decisions happened that made me not want to, or what situations happened that I've learned will trap me later on. So this is why I don't do it.
No, I mean, that makes perfect sense actually, because that would even be better. He could do a combination of the two. He could get a few things to get things started and maybe get Star Wars back on track. But I just think it's funny that, 20 years ago, he was like the total villain, and everybody wanted Luke as far away from Star Wars as possible. And now, it's like, oh, bring Lucas back, or oh, look, he visited the set, and yes, he actually directed a scene, or he consulted, or he did something. And I'm like, okay, things have got to be pretty bad in your eyes if you now want Lucas to come back,
right?
But I mean, again, I think that's human nature. It's one of those, you don't know what you got till it's gone.
Definitely.
And that's what it comes down to. But what about you guys? Do you guys think that Lucas should come back? Do you agree with us in the capacity that we discussed? Or do you guys have a different view? Should he not come back at all? Or maybe you think that he should come back but in a different capacity than what we just laid out? Let us know in the comment section. Or let us know in the chat right now. All right, who's the second question from?
The second one comes from Connor B. His question is it wise for them to do an Ahsoka series when the casual fan may not be aware of her vast background? The Mandalorian is a completely new character, and that's why it works.
Well, I mean, you could look at it from the standpoint of to them, Ahsoka would be a new character.
Well, I get his point. Mandalorian is new to everybody, like us, like people who've been watching Star Wars since the beginning of time. For us, it's a completely new character. Whereas Ahsoka, we know Ahsoka, so we're like, okay, we're going to be looking for certain things, or she may make mention of something. So you mean
there's expectations?
There's expectations, and there's the background. It's like, okay, well, I'm Ahsoka Tano, and blah 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 blah, and my master was Anakin Skywalker, and everybody's like, well, wait, where did she come from? Like, what do you mean your master was Anakin Skywalker? But now they have to go back and watch the Clone Wars just to figure out like all the backstory of how Ahsoka came to be.
Yeah, but I have mixed feelings about this because you can't keep making content based on the casual fan.
No.
You have like 40 years now of people that, and there's a lot of hardcore fans, and it's time that. No, they do make it for the hardcore fans. And then other people discover it and, if they want to... Yeah, because, again, you don't necessarily have to watch every little piece of backstory in order to get something out of it. Now, if you're curious enough, like after watching it, and you're going, well, I don't... how did this even come to be? Well, okay, now I guess I got to watch Clone Wars to figure it out. Okay, great.
Have fun.
I mean, look, taking Cobra Kai, for example. There's a lot of people that never saw The Karate Kid, but then they watch Cobra Kai and they're like, well, crap, this is like a sequel to some movie that I never saw, so let me go back and watch that series now. That is a natural reaction. And people are used to binge watching things now. That's kind of the way people take content in now.
That is true.
And everybody is making stuff based on source material and things like that. But beyond that, I think it's time that Disney actually rewards
the
fans, the real fans. And by real, I don't necessarily mean your devotion to the series, because a brand new fan could be just as into it or maybe even more so than we are. But the point is, how about the people that have been around for a long time, that have watched all the shows? You've created this universe. It's no different than when they create the Marvel movies, or when they were trying to do it with Stephen King. So Dark Tower, I think they did one more, which it didn't take off the way that they thought it would, but what they were trying to do was create a Stephen King cinematic universe. Because what they wanted to do was actually have all this content that's intertwined. And especially now that everybody's used to these cinematic universes now.
Yeah.
I think that it's not really a problem. I mean, people are used to this whole crossing over, like, oh, yeah, this started here. Now, that doesn't change what I say about if you introduce something in a film, it has to be answered in a film. So it's one of those things that I think that the way to do it, and again, it's a balance. It is a balance. If you do an Ahsoka series, the balance is that if a casual fan watches that series, they should be able to be completely satisfied with the story within that series. In other words, you shouldn't need the information. If you want to go back and watch Clone Wars and Rebels and all that, and now Mandalorian, that would enhance the thing, but it wouldn't be vital. It's no different than Rogue One. You don't have to read Catalyst to understand Rogue One. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you never saw a Star Wars movie ever, you can actually still enjoy Rogue One just based on what it is.
All right.
But obviously, if you've seen the other episodes, it helps.
Right. I think, and I agree with you, I think the other thing is, if you just have to do your proper explanation. Like, okay, if you bring up Ahsoka and she has her own show, there needs to be like a scene where it's like, okay, well, what happened? Like to answer those questions for people within the context of the show. So it's like, well, what happened with you? Like, oh, well, I was, I left the Jedi Order after my master turned into Darth Vader.
It's almost
blah,
like
blah, blah, blah.
Kind of reminds me of that time when
it's like
it's like a little
Family Guy
scene, the Family Guy flashback scene.
Right. So I think if you kind of explain things like as it's going on, like people can keep. Now people are like, oh, okay, I get the context, and then it's like, okay, then you can move forward with new stories because now they understand. It's kind of like the Batman thing. You kind of give the origin story at the beginning, and then it's like, okay, well now that we know how he became Batman, let's just move on. We don't have to keep going back to that. We can just...
No, and in my opinion, with Batman and Superman especially, it's like... And Spider-Man.
Yeah.
It's like, really? Is there somebody on this planet that doesn't know the origin of these heroes? That's why I love that one Hulk movie where it just, in the whole opening sequence, it just basically gave you a really, like the highlights of the origin, and then boom, you're into it.
Yep.
Or basically... in the whole like Batman v Superman and all that. I mean, as many problems as people may have had or Man of Steel, at least it basically picks up like, yes, we already know who these people are. We don't have to go through the origin again.
Right. I hope they don't do it with this new Batman movie either.
It doesn't look like they're going to.
Yeah.
But again, another thing that you got to look at where it comes from Ahsoka is don't forget that Ahsoka is being introduced in The Mandalorian. And like that's like the hottest show. That's one of the hottest streaming shows. It's not even just like a Star Wars thing. I mean,
yeah,
that's like the mecca of casual fans.
Yeah, it's almost like Game of Thrones. How Game of Thrones was. Like,
yeah, I mean,
sure.
People have never even read the books.
Right.
Kind of like it's like, oh, there's books, which again, it's another example. But I would agree more because even though everything that I've said is the way that I feel about it, like if Ahsoka were just this brand new series. But don't forget that Ahsoka's going to be introduced in what's probably one of the hottest shows on television right now. Mm-hmm. So if they give her own series, I don't think it's going to run into the problems that the person asking the question is talking about, because we're going to know who she is. Mm-hmm. Any of this like, oh, who is this chick all of a sudden? I think they're going to answer that in The Mandalorian, and that's one of the reasons why I'm really curious on how are they going to introduce her in The Mandalorian.
Right.
And what role is she going to play? Mm-hmm. Because if you do a spinoff series, and I don't think for 1 second that they didn't plan that, like, okay, first we're going to... I think actually they probably wanted to do the series first, and they're like, you know what? It works story-wise. Why don't we introduce her in The Mandalorian? And that'll take care of the whole introduction.
Follow over, yeah.
Exactly, because then we do the series, and number one, it'll actually guarantee a certain amount of success for the series.
It's kind of like that Frasier thing.
Exactly.
Like in Cheers. Like,
right. You do a spin-off of this character in Cheers, and boom, it's like instantly a hit. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's, a phenomenal show doesn't hurt things either.
That's true.
So, yeah. So, again... this was a show where we decided it was kind of a special thing, like a single topic show. We're probably going to do some more of these, I think, because it's kind of nice in a way to just be able to focus on
one
thing and a single topic, and especially if we do these live.
And, our work schedules are crazy too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think a lot of times, sometimes we might do this in lieu of the live show, if our work schedules are such where we can't do it, because, I mean, hey, if you guys kick in and donate, then maybe we could do this full time and bring you guys gangs of shows. But until that time, when a work schedule gets crazy, but we might do this too, or we actually just pre-record a bunch of stuff that we can upload as like single topic shows. I mean, I think that would be a good idea. But let us know. Do you guys want to see more single topic shows? Let us know in the comments. And if you're still hanging with us, chatting with us on the premiere, I can't talk today, then let us know. But until then, next week we should be back live Friday night at 8 o'clock. And, hopefully you guys will join us and chat in some good questions. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.